At 6:47 p.m. on December 20th, 1988, Army Warrant Officer James W. Hall III walked into room 226 at the Days Inn in Savannah, Georgia, carrying a manila envelope. 30 years old, 7 years in Army Signals Intelligence, top secret sensitive compartmented information clearance. The man waiting for him claimed to be his new KGB handler. Hall had documents to sell, secret capabilities, electronic warfare systems, signals intelligence procedures worth $30,000 in cash. The handler asked questions. Hall answered everything. Bragged about 6 years of espionage, described dead drops in Germany, explained how he'd smuggled out thousands of top secret pages in shopping bags, showed no hesitation, no fear, complete confidence. The meeting lasted 43 minutes. Hall walked out with the money. 24 hours later, FBI agents would arrest him at his home. The handler wasn't KGB. He was FBI Special Agent Dmitry Druzhinsky, Russian-American, fluent in the language, perfect in the role. And Hall had just confessed everything on videotape. Between 1983 and 1988, James Hall had sold hundreds of America's most closely guarded signals intelligence secrets to East Germany and the Soviet Union for $300,000. He betrayed Project Trojan, a worldwide electronic network capable of pinpointing Soviet armored vehicles, missiles, and aircraft by their signal emissions during wartime. He handed over the complete National SIGINT requirements list, a 4,258-page document detailing NSA activities, government intelligence requirements, and signals intelligence capabilities by country. He compromised U.S. military liaison mission operations in East Germany, revealing American tank photography methods on New Year's Eve 1984. 3 months later, on March 24, 1985, Soviet forces shot and killed U.S. Army Major Arthur Nicholson Jr., an unarmed U.S. MLM officer, during an inspection tour in Ludwigslust, East Germany. Hall had given them the playbook. He spent up to 2 hours each workday at NSA Field Station Berlin copying classified documents instead of doing his actual job, then stayed late to finish his regular assignments so nobody would notice. Used shopping bags to smuggle originals out of the facility. Met his East German handler in Frankfurt, where they photocopied everything in a safe house. Returned the originals before anyone knew they were missing. Bought a brand new Volvo with cash. Bought a new truck. Made a large down payment on a house. Took flying lessons. Told 6 different stories to explain where the money came from. And nobody caught him for 5 years. The U.S. Army's Signals Intelligence Network in Europe was hemorrhaging secrets throughout the 1980s. Operations went dark. Sources went silent. Electronic warfare systems the Soviets shouldn't have known about suddenly showed up in their countermeasures. NSA Field Station Berlin, one of the premier Cold War listening posts, was the crown jewel of American signals. Intelligence operations against the Warsaw Pact. Positioned on Teufelsberg in West Berlin, it intercepted Soviet military communications, tracked Warsaw Pact troop movements, monitored radar signatures, and collected electronic intelligence that shaped NATO strategy. The station employed the best analysts the U.S. Army had, top secret clearances, compartmented access, years of training, and one of them was selling everything to the enemy. Between 1983 and 1985, classified information began appearing in Soviet hands at an alarming rate. New American electronic warfare techniques were countered within months instead of years. Soviet forces demonstrated knowledge of U.S. signals intelligence collection methods that should have been impossible to detect. NATO communication security procedures that had taken years to develop were suddenly ineffective. The pattern was clear. Someone with access to the most sensitive compartments of American signals intelligence was talking. But the pool of suspects was enormous. Hundreds of soldiers, civilians, and contractors had the necessary clearances. Thousands had pieces of the puzzle. Finding one traitor among them would take a miracle, or a defector. In December 1988, an East German intelligence officer named Manfred Severin, codenamed Canna Clay, made contact with U.S. authorities. He worked for the Stasi, East German intelligence, As a translator and courier, he had information, a big tip, about an American selling secrets. The German Staatsschutz rejected him. Too risky. The CIA turned him away. Not enough verification. U.S. Army foreign counterintelligence activity took him seriously because he had a name. James W. Hall III, warrant officer. Signals intelligence analyst, currently stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia, former employee of NSA Field Station Berlin, where he'd worked from 1982 to 1985. The timeline matched the security breaches. The access matched the compromised material. The investigation moved fast. Army counterintelligence agents began surveillance immediately. Hall was living in Savannah, Georgia, assigned to a signals intelligence unit at nearby Fort Stewart. They watched his routine, his purchases, his contacts. Within days, they confirmed what Severin had told them. Hall lived far beyond his means. Brand new Volvo, paid in cash. New pickup truck. House with a large down payment he shouldn't have been able to afford. Flying lessons at a private airfield. Expensive dinners. Trips to Austria he'd never explained. The red flags were everywhere. But they needed more than suspicion. They needed evidence. They needed him to incriminate himself. So they set a trap. FBI Special Agent Dmitry Druzhinsky was born in the Soviet Union, emigrated to America, and became one of the Bureau's best Russian-speaking undercover operatives. He'd played this role before, KGB handler, serious, professional, demanding. The kind of officer who wouldn't tolerate mistakes. In mid-December 1988, Hall received a message through an intermediary. His usual East German contacts were unavailable. New arrangements were necessary. A Soviet intelligence officer wanted to meet him in Savannah. Routine business. Standard payment for materials Hall had been holding. Hall agreed immediately. No hesitation, no paranoia, just greed. December 20th, 1988, 6:47 p.m. Days Inn, Savannah, Georgia. Hall walked in carrying documents. Agent Druzhinsky, in character, examined them. Hall sat down, confident, comfortable, like he'd done this 100 times before, because he had. Druzhinsky asked about the documents. Hall explained everything, classification levels, sources, how he'd obtained them. The conversation expanded. Druzhinsky pressed for details about Hall's espionage career. How long had he been working for Soviet intelligence? What had he provided? How had he smuggled materials out of NSA facilities in Germany? Hall answered it all, proudly. He'd been spying for 6 years, since 1983. He'd sold top-secret intelligence data to both East Germany and the Soviet Union. At NSA Field Station Berlin, he'd spent up to 2 hours daily copying classified documents. Originals went out in shopping bags. He'd photocopied them in Frankfurt with help from his East German handler. Returned the originals before anyone noticed. Easy. Simple. Profitable. How much had he made? Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why had he done it? Money. Not ideology, not anger at America, not political belief, just money. He wanted to never worry about his next dollar. He wasn't anti-American, he insisted. He waved the flag as much as anybody else. He just liked getting paid. Druzhinsky asked about future cooperation. Hall was willing. He had access to current signals intelligence. He could provide more. The meeting lasted 43 minutes. Every word recorded on videotape. Every admission documented. When Hall left with $30,000 in cash, FBI agents followed him home. 24 hours later, they arrested him. December 21st, 1988, Fort Stewart, Georgia. FBI agents and Army counterintelligence officers surrounded Hall's residence. He answered the door without resistance. They arrested him at approximately 9 a.m., read him his rights, searched the house, found classified materials he'd kept as insurance, found evidence of his espionage communications, found the $30,000 from the previous day's meeting. Hall said nothing. His lawyer would handle it. The FBI also arrested Hussein Yildirim that same day in Tampa, Florida. Turkish national, naturalized U.S. citizen, 60 years old, auto mechanic by trade. Yildirim had served as Hall's courier, carrying materials between Hall and East German intelligence officers. He'd also known Hall's East German handler, who went by the codename Der Meister, the Master. Yildirim faced life in prison for conspiracy to commit espionage. His arrest closed the network. The investigation was over. The damage assessment was just beginning. U.S. Army foreign counterintelligence activity immediately started cataloging what Hall had betrayed. The list was staggering. Project Trojan, a worldwide electronic warfare network designed to locate and target Soviet military assets by their electronic emissions during wartime. Compromised. The Soviets now knew how it worked, how to counter it, how to deceive it. Years of development and billions of dollars in deployment, rendered partially ineffective by one traitor with a Xerox machine. The National SIGINT Requirements List, 4,058 pages detailing every signals intelligence priority, target, and capability the United States government had. Compromised. The Soviets knew exactly what America was listening for, where, and how. They could restructure their entire communication security posture based on this single document, NSA Field Station Berlin Operational Procedures. Compromised. The Soviets and East Germans knew which frequencies the U.S. monitored, which protocols the analysts followed, which targets received priority attention. They could now communicate with near impunity on channels they knew the U.S. wasn't watching. U.S. military liaison mission methods, including tank photography procedures Hall had revealed in 1984. Compromised. Soviet forces knew the U.S. MLM reconnaissance patterns, which installations they photographed, how they approached sensitive sites. 3 months after Hall's betrayal of U.S. MLM operations, Soviet forces killed Major Arthur Nicholson Jr. during a U.S. MLM inspection tour. The Soviets claimed Nicholson had entered a restricted area. U.S. officials believed the Soviets had deliberately set a trap based on knowledge of U.S. MLM methods. Hall's information had given them the playbook. The damage extended beyond specific programs. Every signals intelligence operation Hall had touched during his 5-year betrayal was now suspect. Every source he'd known about was potentially compromised. Every capability he'd described was assumed known to the enemy. The NSA had to change procedures, frequencies, encryption methods, and operational patterns across Europe. The cost ran into billions. The strategic setback couldn't be measured in dollars, and Hall had done it for money. In 1986, while still stationed at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, before his reassignment to Fort Stewart, Hall had applied for promotion to Sergeant First Class and for a warrant officer appointment. During the routine background investigation for the warrant officer position, one of Hall's supervisors, a major, made a comment to the investigator. He found it strange that Hall could afford a brand new Volvo. The major himself, on an officer's salary, couldn't afford such a car. The investigator asked about it. The major explained he'd questioned Hall about the disparity. Hall had answered smoothly. He had a wealthy aunt who died and left him a trust fund. He received $30,000 annually from it. The major found the story plausible. So did the investigator. The investigator thanked the major and noted he already knew about the trust. Hall's cover story held. His co-workers believed it completely. His apparent wealth never raised official suspicion. He got his warrant officer appointment. His access increased. He sold more secrets. The high living style that eventually alerted authorities came years too late. By the time anyone seriously questioned where Hall's money came from, he'd already betrayed nearly everything he had access to. Hall's trial began in March 1989 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Army court-martial, facing multiple charges of espionage, conspiracy, and security violations. Maximum penalty, death. His attorney negotiated a plea deal. Hall would plead guilty to 10 espionage charges, Life in prison was off the table. Instead, 40 years. In exchange, Hall would cooperate fully with the damage assessment, provide complete details of everything he'd sold, every contact he'd made, every method he'd used. The prosecution accepted. Hall pleaded guilty on March 6, 1989. On March 9, 1989, Hall stood before the military judge for sentencing. The government presented evidence of his betrayal, the scope, the damage, the strategic setback his actions had caused. The defense argued Hall had cooperated, shown remorse, agreed to help repair the damage. The judge was unmoved. James W. Hall III was sentenced to 40 years in prison, fined $50,000, ordered to forfeit all proceeds from his espionage activities, given a dishonorable discharge from the U.S. Army. He would serve his time at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, a maximum security military prison housing the worst offenders in the armed forces. 6 months later, Hussein Yildirim stood trial in federal court in Washington, D.C. for his role as Hall's courier. July 20th, 1989. Convicted on all charges. September 20th, 1989. Sentenced to life imprisonment. Yildirim, a 61-year-old naturalized U.S. citizen, faced spending the rest of his life in federal prison for helping Hall pass secrets to East Germany. The judge showed no mercy. Yildirim's courier activities had facilitated one of the most damaging signals intelligence breaches of the Cold War. He served his time at FCI Lompoc, California. Years later, after the Cold War ended, Yildirim was pardoned and deported back to Turkey, where he lived out his remaining years. Hall got no such mercy. At Fort Leavenworth, Hall became inmate number 86448 to 132. Cell block, restricted movement, maximum security. The facility housed murderers, rapists, and traitors. Hall fit the last category. Other inmates knew what he'd done. Some respected it. Most didn't. Espionage for money carried no honor, even among criminals. Hall kept to himself, served his time quietly, avoided trouble. In 2006, author Christy McCrakis interviewed him in prison for her book, Seduced by Secrets, Inside the Stasi's Spy Tech World. First jailhouse interview Hall had ever given. She asked why he'd done it. Hall answered bluntly. He called himself a treasonous bastard, not a Cold War spy. No ideology, no political conviction, just greed. He'd wanted money and hadn't cared about the consequences. He'd gotten both. Hall served 22 years of his 40-year sentence. Released in September 2011 after earning good time credit. He was 53 years old. The Cold War he'd betrayed America during had ended 20 years earlier. The Soviet Union had collapsed. East Germany no longer existed. The Stasi files he'd contributed to were now open to researchers in reunified Germany. In July 1992, the German government had returned 13,088 pages of documents Hall had copied and sold to the Stasi. The handover happened after U.S. pressure on the German Federal Ministry of the Interior, who ordered the return without consulting Germany's Parliamentary Intelligence Oversight Committee, a violation of German law. Only a few hundred pages were retained as classified. The rest went back to NSA. Years later, German officials Joachim Gauck and Hans-Jörg Geiger, who'd authorized the handover, both claimed they didn't remember ordering it. The paperwork said otherwise. Hall's espionage had cost the United States billions in compromised capabilities, years of strategic advantage, and uncounted intelligence opportunities that disappeared when the Soviets learned what America was listening for. Project Trojan required complete redesign. The NSRL had to be rewritten. NSA Field Station Berlin's entire operational security structure was overhauled. New encryption systems, new procedures, new protocols, all because one warrant officer wanted a Volvo. The investigation that caught Hall came from an East German defector who decided to talk and an FBI agent who spoke fluent Russian and played his role perfectly. Hall's own arrogance had sealed his fate. He'd walked into that Days Inn hotel room confident he was meeting his new handler. He'd bragged about his espionage career. He'd described his methods. He'd taken the bait completely. The videotape of that meeting was played at his court-martial. 43 minutes of self-incrimination. His defense attorney had no answer to it. Hall's own words convicted him. After his release in 2011, Hall disappeared into obscurity. No interviews, no public statements, no memoirs. Federal parole supervision, quiet life. The man who'd betrayed some of America's most closely guarded Cold War secrets became a footnote in espionage history, remembered primarily by intelligence professionals who study insider threats, and by historians who write about Cold War espionage. His case is still taught at military intelligence schools, FB training facilities, and NSA security awareness programs. The lesson is always the same. Financial problems create vulnerabilities. Unexplained wealth is a red flag. Lifestyle analysis works. And sometimes the most damaging spies aren't ideological true believers. They're just greedy men who don't care about the consequences. James Hall III sold 6 years of American signals intelligence secrets for $300,000. That's $50,000 per year, less than $5,000 per month. For that price, he compromised electronic warfare systems worth billions, betrayed operational methods that took decades to develop, and handed the Soviets a roadmap to American intelligence priorities. He helped kill Major Arthur Nicholson Jr. by revealing U.S. MLM methods to Soviet forces who then knew how to set a trap. He forced the NSA to restructure its entire European signals intelligence posture. He gave America's enemies a 5-year head start on countering U.S. intelligence capabilities. And he did it for the price of a luxury car and a house. The irony is thick. Hall worked late every day to finish his regular assignments because he'd spent hours copying secrets to sell. His supervisors thought he was dedicated, hardworking, committed. They never suspected he was staying late because he'd spent his workday committing treason. He told 6 different stories about his wealth: inheritance, trust fund, real estate investments, stock market success, family money, gambling winnings. Nobody questioned them seriously until an East German defector gave them his name. The major who'd noticed Hall's Volvo and asked about it had done exactly what security procedures required. He'd reported the discrepancy to investigators. They'd documented it, and then they'd accepted Hall's cover story without verification. No one checked whether the trust fund existed. No one contacted Hall's family to verify the aunt's death. No one audited his finances to see where the money actually came from. They'd written it down and moved on. That failure cost billions in compromised intelligence and years of strategic disadvantage. Hall's espionage career ended because an East German defector talked and an FBI undercover agent was convincing. Not because anyone caught the red flags, not because security procedures worked, not because investigators followed up on financial discrepancies. An enemy intelligence officer got nervous and defected. That's how the U.S. Army finally stopped James Hall III after 6 years of betrayal. The case changed military intelligence security procedures. Financial disclosure requirements were expanded. Lifestyle investigations became routine. Polygraph examinations increased in frequency and depth. Supervisors received training on recognizing insider threat indicators. Background investigators were taught to verify financial claims instead of just documenting them. Security personnel learned that unexplained wealth isn't just suspicious, it's often the first visible sign of espionage. The changes came too late to stop Hall, but they've helped stop others since. In the decades after Hall's arrest, the U.S. military and intelligence community have caught numerous other insider threats through financial monitoring. Sudden wealth, large purchases, unexplained income, lifestyle inconsistent with salary. The red flags Hall displayed are now part of every counterintelligence professional's checklist. They look for the Volvo, the cash home purchase, the expensive vacations, the multiple conflicting explanations. They verify instead of accepting. They investigate instead of documenting, because James Hall III showed them what happens when they don't. That's why we tell these stories, not to glorify espionage, not to make spies into movie characters, but to remember what's at stake when someone betrays trust. Hall sold signals intelligence secrets for money. Those secrets helped the Soviet Union counter American electronic warfare capabilities, restructure their communication security, and target U.S. intelligence collection efforts. The strategic damage lasted years. The financial cost ran into billions. The intelligence opportunities lost can never be recovered, all because one warrant officer wanted to live better than his salary allowed and didn't care who got hurt. Major Arthur Nicholson Jr. was 44 years old when Soviet forces killed him on March 24, 1985 in Ludwigslust, East Germany. He was conducting a routine USMLM inspection tour when a Soviet sentry shot him without warning. The Soviets claimed Nicholson had entered a restricted area and ignored commands to stop. U.S. officials disputed the account. The incident nearly caused a diplomatic crisis. What wasn't publicly known until years later was that Hall had compromised USMLM operational methods 3 months earlier. The Soviets knew how USMLM teams approached sensitive installations, which routes they took, which equipment they carried. Some intelligence officials believe the Soviets set a trap based on that knowledge. Hall's betrayal may have gotten Nicholson killed. Hall received payment for that information. He spent it on flying lessons. The human cost gets footnoted in official damage assessments. They quantify compromised programs, lost capabilities, strategic setbacks. They calculate dollar amounts for redesigning systems, rewriting procedures, restructuring operations. They don't calculate what it cost Major Nicholson's family when he died, or what it cost the hundreds of intelligence professionals whose years of work were betrayed for $50,000 annually, or what it cost the soldiers whose safety depended on electronic warfare systems the Soviets could now counter because Hall had sold the blueprint. Hall would later say he wasn't anti-American. He waved the flag as much as anybody else. He just decided he didn't want to worry where his next dollar was coming from. So he sold his country's secrets for 6 years until an East German intelligence officer defected and gave up his name. Hall served 22 years in prison, got out in 2011, disappeared, lives somewhere under federal supervision. His name appears in espionage case studies and intelligence history books. He's remembered as one of the Cold War's most damaging signals intelligence traders, a man who sold billions of dollars in capabilities for $300,000 in payments, a warrant officer who betrayed everything he had access to because he wanted a Volvo. The Volvo is gone. The house is gone. The money is gone. The flying lessons stopped decades ago. What remains is a case study in insider threat indicators, a damage assessment measured in billions, and a footnote in Cold War history. James W. Hall III, warrant officer, signals intelligence analyst, trader, served his time and got out. The programs he betrayed took years to rebuild. The trust he violated is still being repaired. The lesson he taught is still being learned. If this story mattered to you, do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube's algorithm to show this story to more people. Stories like this don't get told unless people like you make them visible. Hit subscribe and click the notification bell. We're pulling stories like this from declassified archives, court records, and forgotten files every single week. Real betrayals, real consequences, real people who paid the price for someone else's greed. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from. If you work in intelligence or law enforcement, if someone in your family served during the Cold War, or just type "never forget" so we know you're here. You're not just a viewer. You're part of making sure cases like this aren't forgotten. You're part of making sure the next generation of intelligence officers learns from James Hall's betrayal. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure this story stays visible. These weren't just classified documents. They were strategic advantages that cost billions to develop and years to rebuild. You're helping us honor the professionals whose work was betrayed. See you in the next story.